A poor single dad took the wrong elevator, the billionaire CEO gasped when she saw his face. The elevator doors were already closing when Marcus shoved his maintenance cart through the gap, breathing hard, not even looking up to see which floor button had already been pressed. He had 14 minutes before his shift supervisor would mark him absent from the third-floor boiler check, and 14 minutes was not enough time to be polite or careful or anything other than fast. He didn't notice the gleaming marble floors he had left behind. He didn't notice the gold-trimmed walls of the lobby he had stumbled into. And he certainly didn't notice, not at first, that he had walked into the executive elevator of Harlow Tower, the one reserved strictly for the building's most powerful occupant, until the doors sealed shut behind him and the silence hit him like a wall. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and the idea that life can surprise you in the most extraordinary ways, smash that like button right now, leave a comment below, share this story with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to Kindness Corner, because this is exactly the kind of story we live for. Marcus Cole was 39 years old, and he looked every single year of it. His blue uniform carried the ghost of a grease stain that no amount of washing had ever fully erased. His hands were rough and calloused, the knuckles of his right hand still scarred from a job site accident 3 winters ago that had nearly cost him 2 fingers. He had salt and pepper stubble that he hadn't had time to shave because mornings in his apartment started at 5 with his daughter Lily, who was 8 and asthmatic and needed her inhaler medication administered before school, and ended with him sprinting to catch the 6:40 bus so he wouldn't be docked another hour of pay. He was tired in the way that only single fathers who work double shifts understand, not just physically tired, but tired somewhere deeper, somewhere that sleep alone couldn't reach. He had been doing this for 6 years. 6 years since the accident that took his wife, Elena, on a rain-slicked highway outside of Denver. 6 years of waking up and choosing, every single morning, to keep going, not for himself, but for Lily, who had her mother's eyes and her mother's laugh and who still, sometimes, reached for a hand that was no longer there. Marcus had sold the house, moved into a 2-bedroom apartment in a part of the city where the streetlights flickered, taken a job as a maintenance worker at Harlow Tower, and quietly, stubbornly, rebuilt what he could of a life from the rubble of the one he had lost. He didn't complain. He didn't ask for help. He simply worked, and loved his daughter, and carried everything else in silence. He was staring at the elevator floor when the doors opened on the 42nd floor. She walked in without looking up from her phone, the way powerful people often do when they have never had reason to expect the unexpected. Alexandra Harlow was the CEO of Harlow Industries, a woman whose face appeared on the covers of business magazines, whose decisions moved markets, whose name was spoken in boardrooms with the kind of reverence usually reserved for forces of nature. She was composed, polished, and utterly in control of every room she ever entered, except that when she finally looked up and saw the maintenance worker standing in her private elevator, the phone slipped from her fingers and hit the marble floor with a sharp crack, and the color drained from her face so completely that for a moment she looked like she might fall. Marcus reached out instinctively and caught her by the elbow, steadying her, and that was when their eyes met fully for the first time. And something in Alexandra Harlow's expression broke open, not with anger, not with surprise at a stranger in her elevator, but with something far older and far more painful than either of those things. Her lips parted. Her breath came in a short, sharp gasp. And she whispered a name that Marcus had not heard spoken aloud by anyone but himself in nearly 2 decades. She said the name of his brother. Marcus had a brother named Daniel Cole, had being the operative word, because Daniel had disappeared from his life 20 years ago, after a falling out so bitter and so complete that Marcus had stopped hoping for a reunion and started simply hoping that wherever Daniel was, he was alive. The two of them had grown up in a small town in Ohio, raised by a mother who worked 3 jobs and a father who had left before either of them was old enough to remember his face. They had been close once, the kind of close that only poverty and shared survival can create. And then one argument, one terrible, irreversible argument over money and pride and all the small wounds that accumulate in families that have nothing, had split them apart, and Marcus had spent 20 years living with the quiet ache of that loss alongside every other loss he carried. Alexandra's maiden name, it turned out, had not always been Harlow. She had taken the name legally, years ago, at a moment in her life when she was trying to become someone new. Her birth name, the name on a birth certificate filed in a small Ohio hospital, was Alexandra Cole. Daniel Cole's daughter. Marcus's niece, whom he had never known existed, because by the time she was born, he and Daniel had already stopped speaking, and Daniel had been too proud and too broken to reach out and say, "I have a daughter, and she needs family, and I think I am dying." Daniel Cole had died 11 years ago of a heart condition he had kept private from nearly everyone, leaving behind a 22-year-old daughter who had clawed her way out of grief and poverty through sheer force of will and ended up building one of the most successful companies in the country. She had searched for her father's family once, years ago, and found nothing, because Marcus had moved so many times in those years of rebuilding that he had become nearly invisible to anyone who might have been looking. She had eventually stopped searching, convinced herself she was better off without roots, and poured everything she had into her work. But she had never stopped grieving. And she had never stopped wondering. The elevator reached the lobby. Neither of them moved to leave. They stood there in that small, gleaming space, the billionaire CEO and the maintenance worker, and for a long moment neither of them said anything at all, because some recognitions are too large for immediate words. Marcus looked at her face and saw his brother's jaw, his brother's brow, the stubborn set of a mouth that he had once known better than his own. And Alexandra looked at Marcus and saw something she had long since given up on finding, evidence that she came from somewhere, that she belonged to someone, that she was not entirely alone in the world. He told her about Elena. She told him about Daniel. He showed her a photo of Lily on his phone, a gap-toothed girl grinning in front of a school art project, and Alexandra pressed her hand to her mouth and laughed and cried at the same time, because Lily had Daniel's eyes too, and the world was suddenly, impossibly, unbearably full of connections she had not known were there. Before they left that elevator, Alexandra had already taken out her own phone, and before Marcus could protest, she had called her assistant and quietly, firmly, begun rearranging things. Not charity, she understood him well enough already to know he would refuse that. But family. Simply, finally, family. Lily got a new inhaler that month, the expensive kind that works faster. She also got an aunt who showed up at her school art show and cried at a watercolor of a sunset like it was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. And Marcus, for the first time in 6 years, didn't carry everything alone. All of it started because a tired man pushed a cart into the wrong elevator, and something that had been broken for 20 years quietly, miraculously, began to mend. If this story touched your heart the way it touched ours, please like this video, leave a comment telling us what this story meant to you, and share it with someone who needs a reminder that life still has beautiful surprises waiting. Before you go, drop the word family in the comments if you believe it's never too late to find the people you were meant to find. Subscribe to Kindness Corner, and we'll keep bringing you stories that remind you why hope is always worth holding onto, ****.